My name is Lois Carrington, and I'm 62 years old. 3 nights before Christmas, I heard something no mother should ever have to hear. I was in the laundry room, folding towels, letting the hum of the dryer fill the quiet house. Steam fogged the small window, and for a moment, everything felt ordinary, safe. Then, I heard my son's voice through the cracked door. Daniel, the boy I carried, through 28 hours of labor. The man I used to call my greatest pride. Rebecca, he said to his wife, his tone low but clear. The best Christmas present would be if she just died. The red towel slipped from my hand. For a heartbeat, I waited for laughter, some hint it was a cruel joke. But Rebecca's voice came next, calm as ever. You said it, not me. Then silence, a silence heavier than any scream. I stood frozen until my knees nearly gave way. Somehow I made it upstairs, to the in-law suite where they graciously let me stay. The one room I was never allowed to decorate, the one without a lock. I sat on the edge of the bed, shaking, the words looping in my head. My only child wished I were gone. For years, I had been their quiet backbone, the babysitter, the bill payer, the steady hand that held the family together. I had sold the home Richard and I built with love just to help them buy this one. I believed kindness would come back, that love was enough. But sitting there, staring at the beige walls and the suitcases I hadn't opened in years, I saw the truth. Love had become a transaction. A one-way current draining me dry. If you've ever heard words that shattered you, you'll understand this part. The numbness that comes before the tears. The stillness that replaces anger. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. Instead, I reached for my notebook, opened it to a clean page, and wrote down every word my son had said. I promised myself I would never forget them. Those words, so cruel, so final, would become the beginning of my answer. The room around me felt smaller than ever. No photos of me hung on the walls. No trace of my life existed there. I thought of everything I'd given up for Daniel. The canceled cruise to cover his rent. The retirement savings that became their down payment. The countless times I'd filled their fridge or rocked their children to sleep so Rebecca could rest. I had called it love. But love without gratitude is slow poison. That night, as the house creaked and the winter wind pressed against the window, I stared at the closet. Inside were the suitcases from a life on hold. The smallest one still carried a faded tag from that canceled trip. I ran my fingers over the notebook, tracing Daniel's words in ink the way I once traced his hair as he slept on my chest. How did that tender boy become this cold man? The silence whispered its answer. You are not wanted here. And in that whisper, something within me began to shift. Not rage, not despair, but resolve. Tomorrow, I decided, would not be the same. The next morning, I moved through the house like a ghost. I brewed coffee, folded laundry, and smiled faintly at my grandchildren as if everything were fine. Rebecca's clipped tone floated behind me, lists of chores, schedules, reminders that never ended. On the surface, it was a normal day. Inside, I carried the weight of Daniel's words like a bruise no one could see. After breakfast, I climbed back to my room. The in-law suite, my so-called space, felt colder than usual. I sat at the small desk and opened the drawer where I kept old mail. At the top of the pile was an envelope stamped with the mortgage company's logo. My stomach twisted as I tore it open, 3 months past due. I froze. This was the very house I had sacrificed my savings for, the one Daniel had sworn would always be part mine. Now it was teetering on the edge of foreclosure. I turned on my laptop, my fingers trembling. I hadn't logged into our shared account in years. I trusted Daniel to handle things responsibly. But the numbers on the screen made my heart drop. Quiet withdrawals, week after week. Thousands gone. The so-called emergency fund I'd set up had become their private spending account. For years, I'd thought I was helping. Filling their pantry, paying a bill here and there, covering just one more short month. But it wasn't love anymore. It was dependence dressed as gratitude. Voices floated up from downstairs. Daniel's, sharp and anxious. That emergency account's empty. Completely drained. Rebecca's, casual as ever. Then what about her other one? The Christmas account? Daniel snapped back. I'm not robbing my mother. But his voice lacked conviction. Just a pause, and then, "I'll figure something out." My breath hitched. They weren't just careless, they were planning what else to take. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was theft. I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself and walked back to the desk. My fingers brushed over a thick folder buried at the bottom drawer. Inside were papers I hadn't looked at in years, legal documents Richard and I had kept carefully organized, the co-ownership deed, notarized agreements, and letters from our attorney. When I found my signature, my name still printed clearly on the title deed, my heart pounded. Daniel had never removed me. A whisper left my lips. My name is still here. For the first time in days, something inside me steadied. Beneath all the pain, a quiet spark ignited, proof that I was not powerless, not yet. That evening, when the house had gone still, I sat at the desk again, the folder open before me. The papers smelled faintly of dust, the ink slightly faded, but they carried Richard's presence, his voice echoing from years ago, low. Trust people with your heart, but never with your money. At the time, I'd laughed at his caution. Now, I understood it was love disguised as wisdom. With a shaking hand, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Sophia Miller. "Please," I said when the receptionist answered. Moments later, that familiar, steady voice came on the line. "Lois? It's been a long time." "Sophia," I whispered. "I need to know if the paperwork on the house is still valid, the one with my name." She paused briefly. "Of course it is. Daniel never filed any changes. You still own 40%. I exhaled, the breath trembling out of me. "So I still have rights?" "You do," she said softly. "Tell me what's going on." And I told her every detail. The overheard words, the empty accounts, the unpaid mortgage, the quiet, casual cruelty that had crept into my life like rot. When I finished, Sophia's voice turned firm. "Lois, you are not trapped. You have options. You can leave and take your share with you." I stared at the suitcase in the closet. Its faded tag still marked Copenhagen cruise, cancelled. For the first time in years, I whispered, "I'm ready." Sophia promised to draw up the papers by morning. That night, I began to pack, not in panic, but in peace. Every folded sweater, every tucked-away photo felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. And as I placed the folder labeled Plan B on top, I finally understood. This wasn't running away. It was walking back toward freedom. It had been 11 years since I last saw him. 11 years since the day he walked out, uniform crisp, jaw set, and silence heavy enough to crush a room. Back then, I thought that silence meant strength. Now I knew it meant guilt. When he walked into my office, I almost didn't recognize him. The man who once made the ground tremble with a single command now moved like a shadow of his former self. Slower, smaller, softer. His posture was still straight, his hair still cut with military precision, but his eyes told another story. "Daniel," he said quietly, like the name hurt to speak. "Colonel," I replied. "Out of habit, not respect." He flinched. "Just Thomas now." I studied him for a long moment. The man who had once been my mentor, my closest friend, and in the end, my greatest disappointment. He had taught me everything about leadership, loyalty, and discipline, yet broke every one of those principles when he betrayed the people who trusted him most. "What brings you here?" I asked finally, motioning to the chair across from me. He hesitated before sitting. "I heard about the project, the one for veterans. I wanted to see it myself." I nodded slowly. "You mean the foundation I started after everything you covered up?" His jaw tightened. "I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I leaned forward. "You destroyed careers, lives. You made sure I took the fall for something you ordered." He didn't answer. His hands trembled slightly, and for the first time I saw it, not authority, but regret. "I didn't come for forgiveness," he said. "I came because you were right. About everything." I sat back, arms crossed. The room was silent except for the hum of the old air conditioner. The young soldier in me wanted to yell, to make him feel the weight of what he'd done. But the man I'd become understood something deeper. Closure doesn't come from revenge. It comes from seeing the truth and realizing it no longer controls you. I moved on, Thomas, I said quietly. You should too, he nodded, standing slowly. You did good, son. Better than I ever could. As he walked toward the door, I called out, Thomas. He turned. You taught me one thing I'll never forget. Integrity means doing the right thing when no one's watching. I just wish you'd learned it too. He lowered his head. So do I. When he left, I sat in silence, the air heavy but my heart strangely light. The ghosts of my past had finally walked out the door, not defeated, not punished, but acknowledged. Outside my office window, the city glowed, alive, relentless, forgiving in its own quiet way. I realized then that redemption wasn't something you waited for someone else to offer. It was something you claimed when you stopped letting your scars define you, and for the first time in years, I felt free. It was a quiet morning when I finally opened my laptop to write the email that had been sitting in my drafts for months. The cursor blinked, almost impatiently, waiting for me to begin. I had spent so long being angry, at her, at myself, at the way everything had unfolded. But now, I just felt free. Hi, Lily, I began. The words came easier than I expected. I saw your company's latest campaign. It reminded me of the old days. Those nights we stayed in the office past midnight, chasing deadlines and drinking cheap coffee. You've come far, and I'm genuinely happy for you. I paused, staring at the sentence. The old me would have added something sharp, something that hinted at the betrayal, the heartbreak, the years I spent rebuilding what she tried to break. But the man who sat at that desk now didn't need revenge to feel powerful. He already had peace. After sending the email, I walked out to the balcony. The city stretched below, busy, alive, indifferent to the past. The wind felt different now. It didn't sting. It carried promise. I thought about everything I'd lost and gained. Sometimes, losing someone isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of who you're meant to become. A few days later, a reply came. Hi, Daniel. I don't know what to say. I saw your company's ad, the one about second chances. It made me cry. I didn't know you still remembered the little things we used to talk about. I hope you're doing well. I really do. Her message was polite, careful. Maybe she wanted to say more, maybe she didn't. But that wasn't my burden anymore. I simply smiled, closed the laptop, and left it at that. That night, I went to dinner with my team. The people who had become like family. We laughed, clinked glasses, talked about the future. When someone toasted to turning pain into purpose, I felt something inside me finally settle. Later, as I walked home, I passed the old cafe where I first met Lily. The sign was faded, the place half empty. For a second, I almost walked in. Then I realized I didn't need to. That chapter was already closed. I took one last look and whispered to myself, thank you. Not to her, but to life, for every heartbreak that became a lesson, for every ending that disguised itself as a beginning. When I reached my apartment, I placed the key on the counter, looked around and smiled. Everything was quiet, peaceful, the kind of peace you don't find by running from your past, but by finally forgiving it.